The Marlowe wasn't the kind of place you just walked into. You needed a membership, a reservation made weeks in advance, and usually a last name that carried weight in boardrooms or society pages. Tucked away on the 43rd floor of a gleaming Chicago skyscraper, the restaurant overlooked the city like a silent judge, cool, distant, and utterly unimpressed by the chaos below. Inside, the lighting was soft but precise, the tables spaced far enough apart that conversation stayed private, and the staff moved like ghosts, present when needed, invisible when not. It was the kind of place where power dressed in tailored suits and spoken low, confident tones over glasses of wine that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. And tonight, at the center table near the floor-to-ceiling windows, sat the man who seemed to own the room without even trying. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. His presence alone made the air feel heavier. Dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than a used car, he sat with his back straight, fingers steepled, listening more than speaking. But when he did talk, everyone leaned in. Waiters paused mid-step. The maitre d' hovered just outside his line of sight, ready to snap into action. Even the other diners, CEOs, politicians, heirs to old fortunes, lowered their voices when they passed his table, as if afraid to disturb the gravity he carried. He'd built an empire from nothing, or so the business magazines claimed. Started with a single apartment building in a rough part of town, flipped it, bought 2 more, then 10, then 100. Now his name was on luxury towers from New York to Dubai. He'd crushed competitors, walked away from billion-dollar deals if the terms didn't suit him, and never once apologized for it. People called him ruthless, calculating. A man who saw the world in numbers and never let feelings get in the way of profit. And maybe that was true. But what really made people nervous wasn't just his wealth. It was the way he looked at you, like he was already 3 steps ahead, already knew your weaknesses, and had already decided whether you were worth his time. Tonight he was celebrating. A hostile takeover he'd been planning for months had just closed. A rival company once considered untouchable now belonged to him. His inner circle, 2 lawyers, a CFO, and a longtime business partner, sat around the table clinking glasses, laughing a little too hard at his dry remarks. Bottles of rare wine sat open, untouched by most, but poured generously for him. He barely smiled, but there was a tightness around his eyes that suggested satisfaction. This was his version of celebration, quiet victory surrounded by people who owed him something. The service at the Marlowe was flawless, but tonight, it wasn't perfect. The sommelier had mixed up 2 vintages, one a 2014 Pauillac, the other a 2015. And though the difference might seem trivial to most, to him it was unacceptable. He'd ordered the 14 specifically. He knew its structure, its balance, the way it opened up after 20 minutes in the glass. The 15 was bolder, fruitier, fine for someone else, but not what he'd asked for. When the mistake was discovered, the sommelier turned pale and apologized profusely, but the damage was done. The mood at the table shifted. The laughter died down. Everyone sensed the storm coming. That's when she arrived. She was new, only been working at the Marlowe for 3 weeks. Before that, she'd been at a diner near the hospital, then a coffee shop near the university. This job paid better, but it came with pressure. You had to be perfect here. One wrong move, one spilled drink, one mispronounced dish name, and you'd be gone before your next shift. She knew that. She'd memorized the menu, practiced the wine pairings, even studied the body language of the regulars so she could anticipate their needs before they spoke. She wasn't here for the glamour. She was here because her younger brother was in the hospital again, and the bills kept piling up no matter how many hours she worked. She walked toward the table with the corrected bottle of wine, her tray balanced carefully in one hand, her posture straight but not stiff. She didn't rush. She didn't fidget. She'd learned long ago that nervous energy made people uneasy, especially people like the ones at this table. As she approached, she kept her eyes down just enough to show respect, but not so much that she seemed afraid. She'd seen him before, of course. Everyone at the Marlowe knew who he was, but she'd never served him directly. Until tonight. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice calm, clear, with just a hint of an accent. Soft vowels rolled R's that hinted at a childhood far from Chicago high-rises. "I've brought the correct bottle, the 2014 Pauillac, as you requested." She set the bottle down gently, then reached for the wrong one to remove it. But before she could, he spoke. "Do you even know what you're holding?" he asked, not looking at her, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the hum of the restaurant. She paused. Yes, sir. It's Chateau Lynch Beige, 2014, from Pauillac, Bordeaux, a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and a touch of Cabernet Franc. It has notes of blackcurrant, cedar, and a hint of graphite. It pairs well with your lamb. A beat of silence. The men at the table exchanged glances. No one spoke to him like that, especially not a waitress. Most would have stammered, apologized again, maybe even dropped the bottle out of sheer panic. But she stood there steady, waiting. He finally looked up at her. His eyes were gray, cool, unreadable. And how would you know that? I read the label, she said simply. And I studied the wine list before my shift. I like to know what I'm serving. He didn't smile. But something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe, or just curiosity. He gestured for her to pour. She did, smoothly, without spilling a drop. Then she picked up the incorrect bottle and turned to leave. But then he said, almost as an afterthought, Your accent. Where are you from? She stopped. Turned back. El Salvador, sir. I came here when I was 10. He nodded slowly, as if filing that information away. You speak very well. Thank you, she said. Not flattered. Not defensive, just honest, and then, just as she thought the moment had passed, he added, But you still brought the wrong wine first. That's incompetence, the words landed like a slap. Her cheeks warmed, but she didn't look down. She met his gaze. The sommelier brought the first bottle, sir. I wasn't the one who selected it. He raised an eyebrow. And yet you're the one serving it. Doesn't that make you responsible? She took a breath. She could walk away, apologize, say yes, sir, and disappear into the kitchen. That's what they expected. That's what everyone else would have done. But something in her, maybe exhaustion, maybe pride, maybe just the weight of everything she carried outside these walls, made her stand her ground. No, sir, she said quietly. Responsibility belongs to the person who makes the decision, not the one who carries it out. The table went completely still. One of the lawyers cleared his throat nervously. The CFO suddenly found his napkin very interesting. Even the maitre d', watching from across the room, took a step forward, ready to intervene. But the man at the center of it all didn't yell. He didn't call for the manager. He just stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, he picked up his glass, swirled the wine, took a sip. You're right, he said finally. About the wine, she blinked. She hadn't expected that. He set the glass down. Leave the bottle. And your name? Elena, she said. Elena, he repeated as if testing the sound of it. Then he turned back to his guests as if the moment had never happened. Now about the Singapore deal. She walked away, her heart pounding, but her step steady. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel his eyes on her all the way to the kitchen door. In the back, the other servers were waiting. One of them grabbed her arm. Are you okay? What did he say? He said I was right, she replied, still a little stunned. The others exchanged looks. No one had ever been right in front of him and lived to tell about it. But Elena didn't feel victorious. She felt tired and worried. She'd stood up to a man who could end her job with a word. And for what? Pride principle? She had bills to pay, a brother to care for. She couldn't afford to be brave. Still, as she washed her hands in the staff restroom a few minutes later, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her dark eyes were tired, yes, but also clear, unbroken. She thought of her brother hooked up to machines, trusting her to keep things together. She thought of her mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to give them a chance in this country. And she thought of the way that man had looked at her, not with anger, but with something closer to interest. She didn't know it yet, but that small moment of honesty, of refusing to shrink herself to make someone else comfortable, had just changed everything. Not because he was impressed, but because for the first time in years, someone had looked him in the eye and spoken the truth without fear. And in a world where everyone told him what he wanted to hear, that truth felt like a shock to the system. Back at the table, he finished his wine in silence. He didn't mention her again that night, but when he left, he tipped double, and he made a mental note next time, request her section. He didn't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe guilt. Or maybe deep down he missed the feeling of being challenged, of being reminded that he wasn't in fact untouchable. The city lights glittered below, endless and indifferent. Inside the Marlowe, the night carried on as usual. But something had shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. And Elena, walking home 3 hours later in the cold sea, Chicago air clutching her coat tight around her, had no idea that the man who dismissed her with a word was already thinking about her again. She just knew she'd survived another night, and that was enough, for now. The next time he came into the Marlowe, it was a Tuesday. Quiet night, half the tables empty. He didn't call ahead. Didn't need to. The moment he stepped off the private elevator, the maitre d' straightened like a soldier at attention and led him to his usual corner table by the windows. But before he even sat down, he said, "I'd like Elena to serve us tonight." The request was so unexpected that the maitre d' hesitated for half a second, just long enough to register his surprise, before nodding quickly. "Of course, sir. Right away." Elena was in the back, refilling water pitchers when the floor manager tapped her shoulder. "He's here. And he asked for you." She froze.
He did what?
"You heard me. Table 7, just be careful, okay?" She nodded, wiped her hands on her apron, and took a slow breath. She hadn't seen him since that night 2 weeks ago. She'd half expected to be fired. Instead, nothing happened. No warning, no reprimand, not even a sideways glance from management. Life at the Marlowe went on as if nothing had occurred. But she'd thought about it more than she wanted to admit. The way he'd looked at her, the way he'd admitted she was right. It didn't make sense. People like him didn't back down, ever. Now he was back, and he'd asked for her. She walked out with a fresh bread basket, her steps measured, her expression neutral. She didn't want to seem nervous, didn't want to seem eager, just professional, that's all. He was alone tonight. No entourage, no power suits flanking him, just him, a leather portfolio on the table and a half-finished glass of sparkling water. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Good evening," she said, setting the bread down. "Evening," he replied. His voice was quieter than she remembered, less sharp. "You're working late." "It's my shift." He nodded, then gestured to the wine list. "I'll have the 14 Pauillac again." She didn't smile, but something inside her relaxed just a little. He remembered. Or maybe he was testing her. "Either way," she said. "Right away, sir." She returned with the bottle, poured a small amount into his glass without being asked, and waited. He swirled it, sniffed, took a sip, then gave a single nod. "Perfect. Thank you." She turned to leave, but he stopped her. "How's your brother?" The question hit her like a cold splash of water. She turned back slowly. "Excuse me?" "Your brother. The one in the hospital. Is he doing better?" Her throat tightened. How did he know that? She'd never told anyone at work about her brother. Not the staff, not management. She kept her personal life locked away, like a secret she couldn't afford to share. And yet here he was, asking about it like it was common knowledge. He's stable," she said carefully. "Thank you for asking." He studied her for a long moment, then looked out the window at the city lights. Medical bills are brutal. Even with insurance, she didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. Was this pity? Curiosity? Some kind of power play? She couldn't tell. He didn't press. Just said, "Bring me the duck confit, and keep the wine coming." She nodded and walked away, her mind racing. He knew about her brother. That meant he'd asked around. Maybe talked to someone in HR. Maybe even looked her up. The thought made her skin crawl, but also, strangely, less afraid. If he'd wanted to hurt her, he would have done it already. Instead, he was asking about her family. That didn't fit the image everyone painted of him. Over the next hour, she served him quietly, refilling his glass, clearing plates, never lingering too long. But each time she came near, she noticed little things. The way his fingers tapped restlessly on the table when he thought no one was looking, the faint lines around his eyes that weren't from age but from stress, the way he barely touched his food even though it was one of the chef's best dishes. He wasn't enjoying himself. He was just here. When the check came, he signed it without looking at the total. Then, as she was clearing his empty wine glass, he said, "Do you always work this hard?" She paused. "I do what I need to do." "For your brother?" "Yes." He was silent for a moment. Then, "You're studying something." "Real estate, I heard." She stiffened. "Who told you that?" "I see you reading books during your break. Saw the cover once. Principles of Urban Development." Not exactly light reading for a coffee break. She didn't deny it. I want to understand how cities work, how housing gets built, who gets left behind. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. And why's that? Because where you live shouldn't decide your future, she said, her voice low but firm. But it does. Every day, he didn't argue, didn't laugh, just nodded slowly like he'd heard that truth before, but forgotten it. After he left, she stood in the empty dining room stacking chairs, her thoughts tangled. He wasn't what she expected. Not kind exactly, but not the monster people described either. Just complicated, human. She didn't see him again for 10 days. Then, on a rainy Thursday, he walked in during the dinner rush, unannounced, unsmiling, and clearly in a foul mood. Something had gone wrong. A deal collapsed, maybe. A partner betrayed him. Whatever it was, he brought the storm with him. He snapped at the host, ignored the sommelier, and when Elena arrived at his table, he barely glanced at her. "I'll have the usual," he muttered. She brought the wine, poured it, stepped back. But as she turned, she knocked over a water glass with her elbow. It wasn't loud, just a soft clink. And the water spilled across the tablecloth, narrowly missing his portfolio. Time stopped. She froze. "I'm so sorry," but he cut her off. "Unbelievable. You can recite the tasting notes of a $50 wine, but you can't carry a glass of water." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Heads turned. The kitchen staff peeked through the pass. Elena's face burned. She grabbed a cloth and started blotting the spill, her hands trembling slightly. "I'll get you a new cloth, sir. And another water." "Save it," he said coldly. "Just go." She stood up, clutching the wet cloth. She wanted to apologize again, to explain that she'd been up all night at the hospital, that her brother had a fever, that she hadn't slept in 2 days. But she didn't, because people like him didn't care about excuses. They only cared about results, so she turned to leave. But then something in her snapped, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet shift, like a door clicking open after being locked for too long. She stopped, turned back. "You're right," she said, her voice calm, clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "I should have been more careful. But you know what else is unbelievable? That a man who owns half the skyline can't tell the difference between a mistake and a person trying their best." He looked up, stunned. She didn't raise her voice, didn't point a finger, just stood there, wet cloth in hand, eyes steady. "You think spilling water makes me incompetent? Fine. But calling me out like I'm nothing, that doesn't make you powerful. It just makes you lonely." The room went dead silent. Even the clatter from the kitchen seemed to pause. He stared at her, his face unreadable. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly he reached for his wine glass. Took a sip. Set it down. "You're fired," he said. Her heart dropped. She nodded once. "Understood." She turned and walked toward the staff door, her back straight, refusing to let him see her cry. She'd lost the job. The bills would pile up. Her brother's treatment might get delayed. But she wouldn't take it back. She wouldn't shrink herself for anyone, not even him. But halfway to the door, the maitre d' caught her arm. "Wait." She turned, confused. He was holding out her coat and her paycheck. "He didn't fire you." "What?" he said. "Tell her to take the rest of the night off. And get some sleep," she blinked. "That's it. That's it." She looked back toward the table. He was gone, his chair pushed in, his coat missing. But on the table where the water had spilled sat a folded napkin. She walked over, picked it up, written in neat, precise handwriting. "You're right. About everything. No signature, no explanation. Just those 5 words. She stood there for a long time, the napkin in her hand, the rain tapping against the windows. Outside, the city blurred into streaks of light and shadow. Inside, something had changed, not just for her, but for him too. She didn't know it yet, but that night he went home and did something he hadn't done in years. He called his assistant and said, "Find out everything you can about Elena Morales. Not her work history, her life, her family, what she cares about. Not to control her, not to punish her, to understand her." Because for the first time in a long time, someone had spoken to him like he was just a man. Not a title, not a fortune, not a force to be feared. And that honesty, raw and unguarded, had shaken him more than any boardroom battle ever could. Meanwhile, Elena walked home in the rain, the napkin tucked safely in her pocket. She didn't feel victorious. She felt seen And in a world that often made her feel invisible, that was worth more than any tip, any job, any apology. The next morning, she got a call from the hospital. Her brother's insurance had been updated. All outstanding balances, paid in full. No explanation. Just a receipt with a single line. Account settled by third party. She knew who it was, and for the first time, she didn't feel angry. She felt curious because maybe, just maybe, the man everyone feared wasn't as untouchable as he seemed. Maybe he was just waiting for someone brave enough to reach out and remind him he was still human. And maybe, just maybe, that someone was her. He started coming in every Thursday night after that. Always alone, always at the same table. Always asked for Elena. At first she kept her distance, polite, professional, never lingering longer than necessary. She didn't trust it. Didn't trust him. People didn't just change overnight, especially not men like him. She figured it was a phase, a whim, maybe even a test to see how far she'd bend before breaking. But weeks passed, then a month, and he never raised his voice again. Never made a snide comment. Never acted like he owned the air she breathed. Instead, he watched her. Not in a creepy way. More like someone studying a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. He noticed how she remembered the elderly couple in booth 3 always split the salmon. How she brought extra crackers to the man with the shaking hands. How she never wrote anything down but never forgot an order. He saw her during her break, sitting by the service window with a worn textbook open on her lap, highlighter in hand, scribbling notes in the margins. Once he even saw her slip a to-go container into her bag, not for herself, but for her brother. She later admitted when he asked. One night after closing, she was waiting at the bus stop 2 blocks from the restaurant. It was late, past midnight, and the rain had started again, a steady Chicago drizzle that turned sidewalks slick and streetlights into hazy halos. The bus was running late as usual. She stood under the awning of a closed pharmacy, hugging her coat tight, her breath fogging in the cold air. Her feet ached. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. And in her bag, a stack of bills she hadn't opened yet. She was afraid to see how much more had piled up. Then a black town car pulled up to the curb. She tensed. It wasn't uncommon for wealthy patrons to offer rides, but she never accepted. Too risky. Too complicated. But the window rolled down and it was him. Get in, he said. Not a request. Not a command. Just simple. She hesitated. I'm fine, sir. The bus will be here soon. It's been 20 minutes, and it's raining. I don't mind. He sighed, then opened the door himself and stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit this time. Just a dark overcoat, no tie. Hair slightly messy like he'd run his hands through it too many times. He looked tired. Human. Look, he said, voice lower now, almost quiet. I'm not trying to impress you. I'm not trying to buy your forgiveness. I just don't want you standing out here in the cold because you're too proud to accept help. She studied his face. No smirk, no arrogance. Just honesty, raw and unexpected. After a long pause, she nodded. Okay, he held the door for her. She slid into the back seat, careful not to get water on the leather. He got in after her, gave the driver an address, hers, she realized with a jolt, and then they were moving. Silence filled the car. Not awkward exactly. Just heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, he spoke. Why real estate? She looked out the window. Because it's where people live, where kids grow up, where families eat dinner, argue, laugh, fall apart, come back together. A building isn't just bricks and pipes. It's someone's whole life. He nodded slowly. I used to think that way too. A long time ago. What changed? Success, he said almost bitterly. When you start winning, you forget why you started playing. She turned to him. You could change it back, you know. Change what? The way you build. The way you treat people. You have the power to do things differently. He laughed, a short, dry sound. Power doesn't make you good, Elena. It just makes you visible. And people like me? We get used to being feared. It's easier than being trusted. She didn't argue. Just said, my brother says the scariest people are the ones who are most afraid. He went quiet, stared out his own window. The city passed in streaks of light and shadow. When they reached her apartment, a modest building in a neighborhood that had seen better days, he didn't let her out right away. You ever think about doing more than studying? He asked. Every day, she admitted. But school costs money. Time costs money. And right now I'm just trying to keep my head above water. You're smart, he said simply. Smarter than half the people in my boardroom. You see things they don't, like how a building affects a whole block, not just the profit margin. She didn't know how to respond to that. So she just said thank you. He nodded. Then as she opened the door to leave, he added, You asked me earlier why someone with everything seems so angry all the time. She paused, one foot on the sidewalk. I'm not angry, he said quietly. I'm empty, and I forgot how to fill it. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time she didn't see a billionaire. She saw a man who'd traded his soul for a skyline and didn't know how to get it back. She didn't say anything, just gave a small nod and closed the door. The car drove off. She stood there in the rain for a long time, watching its taillights disappear. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived at the hospital billing office. Inside was a check, enough to cover every outstanding charge for her brother's care plus a year of follow-up treatments. No note, no return address, just a single line on the memo. For Elena's peace of mind. She found out about it when the hospital called, confused but grateful. They asked if she knew who sent it. She said she had an idea. She didn't thank him. Not right away. But the next Thursday when he came in, she brought him a small plate of flan, the kind her mother used to make. He raised an eyebrow. This isn't on the menu. It's from me, she said. My way of saying, I see you too. He ate it slowly, thoughtfully. When he was done, he said, Your mother made this? She taught me how. It's the best thing I've tasted in years. She smiled just a little. Good. After that, something shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet, but respect. A quiet understanding. He stopped asking for the 14 Poyak every time. Sometimes he'd let her pick the wine. Sometimes he'd ask her opinion on a dish. Once he even laughed. A real laugh, not the polite chuckle he used in meetings. And the whole restaurant seemed to exhale. One evening, he stayed later than usual. The kitchen had closed. The last guests had left. Only a few staff remained cleaning up. Elena was wiping down the bar when he walked over. You ever think about working somewhere else? He asked. She stopped. Like where? Somewhere that uses your mind, not just your feet. She looked at him. Are you offering me a job? He didn't answer right away. I'm offering you a chance. My foundation is starting a new initiative, affordable housing in underserved neighborhoods. We're building more than units. We're trying to build communities. But my team, they're all finance guys. They see spreadsheets. I need someone who sees people. She crossed her arms. Why me? Because you care. And you're not afraid to say what needs to be said, even to me. She thought about it. Really thought. This wasn't just a job. It was a leap. It meant leaving the safety of tips and predictable shifts. It meant trusting him after everything she'd heard, everything she'd seen. But it also meant a real shot at making a difference. At helping families like hers. I'd need to keep my hours flexible, she said finally. For my brother. Of course, and I won't lie to you. If something's wrong, I'll say it. I'd be disappointed if you didn't, she took a breath. Okay, I'll try it, he didn't smile. But his shoulders relaxed just a little. Good. They shook hands, firm, equal, no power in the gesture. Just two people agreeing to try something new. The next week, she started part-time at the foundation. Her first day, she walked into a sleek downtown office that felt nothing like the Marlowe, but somehow even colder. Glass walls, silent hallways, people typing furiously without looking up. She felt out of place in her second-hand blazer and sensible shoes. But he met her at the elevator. Come with me. He took her to a conference room where a dozen executives sat around a table, charts and blueprints spread out. When she walked in, they all looked up, some curious, some skeptical. This is Elena, he said. She'll be advising us on community impact. Listen to her. And just like that, she was in. At first, they humored her. Asked her questions like she was a token, not a teammate. But then she pointed out something no one else had noticed. The proposed site for a new housing project was right next to a closed school. No playground. No bus stop. No grocery store within walking distance. You're building homes, she said. But you're not building a life. Silence. Then murmurs. Then one of the architects leaned forward. She's right. From that moment, they started listening. He watched her in those meetings, how she spoke with calm authority, how she asked questions that cut through the noise, How she never backed down when she knew she was right. He saw the same fire that had stunned him silent that first night, but now it was focused, purposeful. One afternoon, after a long session, he found her in the break room staring out the window. "You okay?" he asked. She turned. "Just thinking. My brother asked me today if I was happy. What did you say?" "I said I didn't know yet. But I'm closer than I've been in a long time." He nodded. "That's a start." She looked at him. "Why did you really hire me?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because you reminded me that buildings aren't just investments. They're promises, and I'd forgotten how to keep them." She didn't say anything, just handed him a coffee, black, no sugar, the way she'd learned he liked it. He took it. "Thanks." Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, two people who'd once been on opposite sides of a gulf were slowly building a bridge, one honest word at a time, and neither of them knew it yet, but this was only the beginning. She found tea. He led her on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between a stack of medical reports and a pharmacy receipt. It was thin, cream-colored, with the hospital's logo in the corner. She almost tossed it aside, another bill, another reminder of how much she still owed. But something made her open it. Inside was a thank you note. Formal, typed, but warm. It thanked Mr. D. Croft for his generous contribution toward the full settlement of her brother's account. It mentioned the date of payment, the amount, enough to cover every procedure, every night in the ICU, every medication, and closed with heartfelt gratitude on behalf of the entire care team. Her hands went cold. She read it 3 times as if the words might change. But they didn't. He'd done it, not just helped, not just covered part of it. He'd erased the debt entirely, and he hadn't told her, hadn't asked for thanks, hadn't even signed his name on anything she'd seen. For a long time, she just sat at the kitchen table, the letter in her lap, her brother asleep in the next room. She felt a storm of emotions, relief so deep it made her dizzy, gratitude that burned behind her eyes, but also something else. Suspicion. Why? Why would he do this? What did he want? She'd seen how the world worked. Kindness from powerful people usually came with strings, a favor expected later, a loyalty demanded, a price to pay. She couldn't afford to owe him, not emotionally, not professionally, not in any way that might compromise what she was trying to build at the foundation, so she waited until Thursday. Not at the restaurant, he hadn't been back there since she started working for him, but at the office. She found him in his corner suite, late again, the city lights glittering behind him like scattered stars. He was reviewing blueprints, sleeves rolled up, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up when she knocked, and for a second, surprise flickered in his eyes. She rarely came to his office unannounced. "Elena," he said, setting down his pen. "Everything okay?" She walked in, closed the door behind her, and placed the letter on his desk. Didn't say a word. Just let it sit there between them. He glanced at it, then back at her. Understanding dawned. "Ah. You paid my brother's hospital bills," she said. Her voice was steady, but her fingers curled into her palms. "I did. Why?" He leaned back in his chair. "Because you shouldn't have to choose between your job and your family. Because you've been working yourself to the bone while carrying that weight. And because you deserve to breathe." "That's not an answer," she said. "That's a nice speech. I want to know what you expect in return." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time she saw something raw in his expression, not pride, not control, just honesty. "I don't expect anything," he said quietly. "Not a thank you, not loyalty, not even your silence. I did it because I could, and because you made me remember what it feels like to care about someone you don't owe anything to." She didn't move, didn't blink. She wanted to believe him, part of her did, but the other part, the part that had grown up watching her mother clean other people's houses just to keep the lights on, knew better than to trust sudden generosity from men who held all the cards. "People like you don't just give," she said. "They invest. So tell me, What's my return supposed to be? He stood up slowly, walked to the window, and stared out at the skyline. The skyline he'd helped shape. You think I'm trying to buy you? He asked, his voice low. Aren't you? He turned back and there was no anger in his eyes, just sadness. If I wanted to buy you, I would have offered you a raise, a bonus, a corner office. But I didn't. I paid a bill you didn't know I knew about. I didn't tell you. I didn't ask for credit. If that's buying you, then I'm the worst businessman in Chicago. She swallowed. The truth of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. I'm not used to this, she admitted, her voice softer now, to people doing things just because. Maybe that's the problem, he said. We've both forgotten how to be human without an agenda. They stood in silence for a long moment. The hum of the building, the distant wail of a siren, the soft tick of the clock on the wall. It all faded into the background. Finally, she said, Thank you. He nodded. You're welcome. But she wasn't done. I still don't trust you. He almost smiled. Good. You shouldn't. Trust has to be earned, not given because someone writes a check. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. Not the billionaire, not the tycoon, but a man who'd spent so long building walls that he'd forgotten how to step outside them. A few days later, he called her into a meeting, not with the usual team, just the two of them in a small conference room with a whiteboard covered in sketches of a new housing project, a mixed-income development in a neighborhood that had been neglected for decades. There were plans for green spaces, a community center, even a small grocery co-op. I want you to lead this, he said. She stared at him. Me? I've been here 2 months. You see what matters, he said. The architects see square footage. The financiers see ROI. You see families. You see kids walking to school. You see whether a grandmother can carry her groceries home without crossing 6 lanes of traffic. That's what this project needs. She hesitated. I don't have the credentials. You have something better, he said. You have the truth. Still, she shook her head. I can't just jump into a leadership role. People won't respect me. They'll think you're giving me special treatment. Let them think that, he said. Prove them wrong. She looked at the plans, saw the potential, saw the lives that could be changed, and saw, for the first time, a real chance to do more than serve wine or take notes in meetings. I'll do it, she said, but on my terms. He raised an eyebrow. Which are? No backroom deals with developers who cut corners, no pushing out long-time residents to make room for luxury units, and full transparency, every decision, every budget line, shared with the community before we break ground. He didn't flinch. Agreed. And if you ever try to override me on something that hurts the people we're supposed to help, she added, I walk. He met her gaze. Fair enough. They shook on it, not as boss and employee, as partners. Over the next few weeks, she threw herself into the project. She met with neighborhood leaders, sat in on city planning meetings, even spent weekends walking the blocks where the development would go, talking to residents, listening to their fears and hopes. She brought their voices into every meeting, often clashing with the more traditional team members who wanted to stick to the plan. He backed her, every time. Once, when a senior executive argued they should reduce the number of affordable units to increase profit margins, she stood up and said, Then we're not building homes. We're building cages for the poor. The room went silent. He looked at the executive. She's right. Scrap that proposal. Start over. Another time, she insisted on hiring local contractors, even if they cost slightly more. It keeps money in the community, she argued. It builds trust. He approved it without hesitation. Slowly, grudgingly, the team began to respect her, not because of who she knew, but because of what she knew and how fiercely she fought for it. One evening, after a long day of community meetings, she found him waiting outside her apartment building. He wasn't in his town car. He was standing on the sidewalk, hands in his coat pockets, looking up at the windows like he was trying to memorize the shape of the place. You didn't have to come all the way out here, she said, Walking up to him, "I wanted to see where you live," he said simply. Not the address, the place. She studied him. "Why?" "Because I realized something," he said. "All this time I thought I was helping you. But you've been helping me." "How?" "You showed me that success isn't about how much you own. It's about how many lives you lift while you're building." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just said, "Want to come up for coffee? I make it strong." He smiled, a real one this time. "I'd like that." They sat at her. Small kitchen table, two mismatched mugs between them. The city quiet outside. For the first time they talked not about work, not about the past, but about the future. What kind of city they wanted to leave behind. What kind of legacy mattered. And in that moment, the walls between them didn't just crack. They fell. She still didn't fully trust him. Maybe she never would completely. But she was starting to believe that people could change. That even the hardest hearts could soften if someone was brave enough to speak the truth and kind enough to give them a chance to hear it. And he, for the first time in years, felt like he was building something that wouldn't crumble the moment he walked away. Because this time, it wasn't just about steel and glass. It was about people, and that was something worth protecting. The morning of the ribbon-cutting ceremony dawned clear and crisp, the kind of Chicago autumn day that made you forget about the bitter winters and endless gray skies. Golden light spilled over the new buildings, modest in height but thoughtfully. Designed with wide sidewalks, shaded courtyards, and windows that caught the sun just right. There were murals on the walls painted by local artists, a small playground with bright red swings, a community garden already sprouting kale and tomatoes, and in the center, a plaque that read, "Built with respect, for the people who call this home." Elena stood near the front adjusting her blazer, still secondhand but clean, pressed and worn with quiet pride. She wasn't in a server's uniform anymore. She wasn't even just an advisor. Today, she was listed on the program as Project L, EAD Community Development Initiative. Her name was on the official documents. Her ideas were in the brick and mortar. She glanced toward the small stage where he stood, surrounded by city officials and reporters. He looked different, too. Not softer exactly, but less guarded. His suit was still expensive, but his tie was slightly crooked, like he'd been fiddling with it out of nerves. He caught her eye and gave a small nod. Not a boss to an employee, a partner to a partner. The crowd was already gathering, residents from the neighborhood, families with kids holding balloons, elders in wheelchairs wrapped in light shawls, local shop owners who'd watched this block decay for years. There was laughter, music from a portable speaker, the smell of tamales and coffee drifting from a food truck parked nearby. It didn't feel like a corporate event. It felt like a celebration, like a beginning. A reporter from the local news station stepped up to the microphone first. "Mr. Croft," she began, "just a few years ago you were known for high-end luxury towers and aggressive takeovers. Now you're cutting the ribbon on affordable housing in one of the city's most overlooked neighborhoods. What changed?" He didn't give the polished answer his PR team had probably rehearsed. He looked out at the crowd, at the woman holding her grandson's hand, at the teenager helping an older man find a seat, at Elena standing quietly near the front, and said, "I met someone who reminded me that silence isn't strength, and that sometimes the bravest voice in the room belongs to the person everyone overlooks." The crowd murmured. Some smiled. A few clapped. Elena felt her throat tighten, but she kept her composure. She hadn't expected him to say that. Hadn't asked for credit. But hearing it, spoken plainly, without fanfare, made all the late nights, the arguments, the moments of doubt worth it. After the speeches, people wandered through the new community center. A bright, open space with a kitchen for cooking classes, a room for after-school tutoring, and a small clinic that would open next month. Kids ran through the hallways, their shoes squeaking on the polished floors, shouting about who got to pick the first book from the new library corner. Elena found herself near the garden, where a group of women were already planning what to plant next spring. One of them, a grandmother with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, pulled her aside. "You did this," the woman said, squeezing her hand. "Not just the buildings. The feeling. Like we matter." Elena shook her head. "We did it. All of us. But you listened," the woman said, "when no one else would." Later, as the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the courtyard, he found her sitting on a bench near the playground. She was watching a little girl swing higher and higher, her laughter ringing like bells. He sat beside her, not too close, just enough to share the space. "It's working," he said quietly. She nodded. "It's not perfect. There's still so much to fix, but it's a start." "You were right about everything," he said. "About the location, the local hires, the community input, even the stupid little herb garden I thought was a waste of space." She smiled. "People need more than walls and a roof. They need dignity, belonging." He was silent for a moment. Then, "I used to think legacy was about how many buildings carried my name. Now I think it's about how many lives feel safer because of them." She looked at him. "You could have kept doing what you were doing. No one would have blamed you." "Maybe," he said, "but I would have." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned pink and orange. Around them, the neighborhood buzzed with life. Real, messy, hopeful life. A man walked his dog past the new benches. A teenager practiced skateboard tricks near the bike rack. Two kids shared an ice cream cone, arguing good-naturedly over who got the last bite. "You know," he said after a while, "I never thanked you properly." "For what? For not letting me stay the man I was?" She turned to him. "You chose to change. I just reminded you that you could." He shook his head. "Most people would have walked away after that first night. Called me a monster. Written me off. But you saw something else." Even when I didn't, she thought about that. Thought about all the times she'd wanted to quit. To go back to waiting tables where the rules were simple and the risks were clear. But something had kept her going. Maybe it was her brother's smile when he came home from the hospital. Maybe it was the look in this man's eyes the first time he admitted she was right. "I stayed," she said, "because I believed people can change, even the ones who seem set in stone." He smiled, a quiet, genuine thing. "Turns out we both needed someone to believe in us." As dusk settled, the official event wound down. The reporters packed up their cameras. The officials left in their black sedans. But the neighbors stayed. They brought folding chairs, strung up fairy lights, started a small fire in the courtyard pit. Someone pulled out a guitar. Another brought out tamales wrapped in banana leaves. Elena and he stood at the edge of it all, watching. "You don't have to stay," she said. "You've done your part." He looked at her. "This isn't about duty anymore. It's about belonging," and so he stayed. He sat on a plastic chair next to a retired teacher, who told him stories about the old grocery store that used to be on this corner. He listened as a young mother explained how hard it was to find safe, affordable housing before this project. He didn't speak much, just listened. Really listened. Elena watched him, and for the first time, she saw not a millionaire, not a tycoon, not even a reformed version of either, but a man finally at peace with his own humanity. Later, as they walked toward the parking lot together, he stopped. "I've been thinking," he said. "There's another neighborhood on the south side, similar needs. Worse neglect. I want to do this again, but only if you're leading it." She didn't answer right away. She looked back at the glowing courtyard, at the people laughing under string lights, at the little girl still swinging, even though it was nearly dark. "Only if we do it the same way," she said. "No shortcuts. No compromises. And the community decides what they need, not us." "Agreed," he said. They shook hands again. Firm, equal, full of unspoken understanding. He drove off in his town car, but not before rolling down the window and saying, "See you Monday." "See you Monday," she replied. She walked home slowly, the cool air brushing against her face. Her brother was waiting for her, sitting on their apartment steps with 2 cups of hot chocolate. "How'd it go?" he asked. She sat beside him, took a cup, and smiled. "It went better than I ever imagined." He studied her face. "You look lighter." "I feel it," she said. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one in the night sky. Back in his penthouse, far above the city, he didn't turn on the lights. He stood by the window looking down not at the skyline he'd built, but at the quiet glow of the new neighborhood. Small, humble, alive with promise. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to own more, to win more, to prove anything to anyone. He was enough, and that was everything. Months later, when people asked how the city's most feared businessman became its most unlikely champion for affordable housing, He never gave a long speech. He just said, "I met someone who spoke the truth and had the courage to keep speaking it, even when I didn't want to hear it." And Elena, when asked how a waitress became a leader in urban development, would simply say, "I refuse to be invisible." Together, they proved that change doesn't always come from the top down or the bottom up. Sometimes it starts in the middle, with two people choosing to see each other, not as roles or titles, but as human beings worthy of a second chance. The millionaire was no longer untouchable, but for the first time he didn't want to be. And the waitress? She was no longer just serving tables. She was building a future, one honest conversation, one brick, one life at a time.